What's up everyone, I'm the one and only Zage, and as you can tell, we'll be breaking down Zoro vs Oden. These two are amongst the strongest swordsmen in the series. They are the only swordsmen that have tamed the Great Blade Enma, and they both gave Kaido a permanent scar. Due to these connections, it's a no-brainer that they are compared to each other frequently. However, who is actually the strongest swordsman? Before we delve into this, if you would like to take the time to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel if you like content like this, that'd be greatly appreciated. Let's start things off with the original wielder of Enma, Kozuki Oden. I've actually made a full video detailing how strong he really is, which you can check out after this, but for this video, I'll be debunking some key misconceptions about Oden which has affected how some people in the fandom view him. The first debunk that needs to be made is how Oden was one-shot by Kaido. This is a really dumb point to make when Kaido hit Oden with a boar breath earlier in the fight, but we can ignore that. The main point of this argument is how people ignore the context of the old hag impersonated Momonosuke, which distracted Oden, which gave Kaido a free shot. However, the distraction goes a lot deeper than that, as Rayleigh first explained to Luffy when teaching him Haki that to have no doubts is true strength. In the fight between Garp and Kuzan, Garp notes that wavering is a sign of weakness, and we can take it all the way back to Water 7 when Nami said that being unsure or losing your way makes you weak as well. In Water 7, Luffy was unable to break Bruno's Tekai or keep up with him while he's using Zoro. This is because Luffy's mind was clouded by Robin's alleged betrayal, but when Luffy learns from Nami that Robin actually sacrificed herself for them and didn't betray the crew, his true strength was showcased in the Bruno rematch. Unlike the last time, Luffy can now damage Bruno through his Tekai and keep up with him while he's using Zoro. All this is because he was no longer mentally nerfed. We can use the same logic for Kuzan in this fight against Garp. Due to Kuzan still having attachment to his former teacher, Garp was able to take advantage of this softness, which Garp even notes. So to reel this back to Oden, he was knocked out by base Kaido due to the shock of seeing his son's life seemingly being held hostage. This mental nerve made Oden so much weaker than he really is, that his durability and endurance couldn't withstand a regular attack from Kaido. To emphasize this point even further, Yamato isn't even on Oden's level, but she was able to endure a hybrid Thunder Bagua straight to the head. So clearly, this moment of Oden who is mentally nerfed isn't indicative of his true strength. The next thing to debunk is this idea that because Oden fought a weaker version of Kaido who was holding back compared to the Kaido that fought in the raid, means that Oden isn't a top tier or whatever people like to say. Just like the first debunk, this just ignores how the fight actually went in an attempt to downplay Oden. First things first, it should be noted that there wasn't any fighting done off screen in the manga for Oden vs Kaido. This may come as a surprise to some of you due to how many people try to push this incorrect interpretation simply because they can't believe a fight between these two titans started and ended this quickly. The proof for this is that the Paradise Totsuka is the first attack Oden does, and it's the only attack that actually injured Kaido, to which the Beast Pirates are in shock that Kaido was actually wounded. To argue this fight was off screen would be to suggest that Oden couldn't land a hit on Kaido, or that he couldn't damage him, which is silly because even the scabbards could hurt Kaido. With that said, let's quickly go over this short fight in the manga. It starts off with Kaido firing a Boro Breath which knocks down Oden, but it does light damage. Oden gets up and launches the Paradise Totsuka, which not only deals heavy damage, it also knocks Kaido down to the point he was immobile for a moment. In this moment, Oden was running up to deliver the finishing attack, which given the stance looked like the Paradise Waterfall, but the old hag intervened. This intervention gave Kaido enough time to get back up and end the fight. Although Oden didn't fight hybrid Kaido that used more powerful techniques against Luffy, this doesn't really matter as Oden was legitimately about to two-shot Dragon Form Kaido had the old hag not intervened. Kaido was a sitting duck, and Oden had already showed he can mortally wound Kaido with just a single attack. As for this version of Kaido being weaker than the raid version, this is largely exaggerated. Even if you believe that Kaido grew stronger over the 20 years, it couldn't be by much, as Kaido suggests against the scabbards that Oden would be capable of the same scarring feat even to his current day self. In fact, the main statement that is used to argue that Kaido grew stronger would be this line by Oden, which the official translator for this actually confirms that Oden's words here were that of mockery, not words of advice. 8 years before Oden's fight, Kaido was known in the world as the embodiment of might. Some years later, King tells Kaido to continue being the strongest there is, and during the Oden fight, Kaido was known as invincible, which is the same way he's viewed in the current day. So clearly Kaido was still at the very least comparable to his so-called prime even 20 years ago. When Luffy opens a fight against Kaido with the Red Rock, Kaido questions how high Luffy's potential is alongside the shadows of Roger, Whitebeard, Rocks, Shanks and Oden. It's implied that these 5 fighters are amongst the few that Kaido considers can truly fight him, and Luffy's potential was heading in that direction. The main takeaway here is that Oden is placed alongside former kings of their era and an emperor of the sea that can truly fight against a current day Kaido. Long story short, even though Oden didn't fight Kaido at his best, Oden was still portrayed by Kaido to be strong enough to fight him on the same level. There are some other debunks that could be made, like Kaido not actually having a hybrid form 20 years ago, but these takes are so ridiculous it's not worth giving any more time to. With that said, we can move on to Zoro, who is the only one since Oden capable of taming Enma. Zoro had several impressive feats during the battle against the Yonko, such as his Dragon Blaze attack being so strong that Big Mom had to warn Kaido to dodge it, which he didn't have to do for any of the attacks prior. Zoro was able to endure the combined attack of Kaido and Big Mom and still continue fighting, even though at least 20 of his bones were broken. However, Zoro outdone all of this by blitzing and scarring hybrid Kaido with the strongest technique, Eiichiro. This moment in a way is supposed to parallel Oden as the only 2 swordsmen that left scars on Kaido. Even when Zoro considered his attack as an underachievement, Kaido still praised him for being able to leave a scar on him. The biggest misconception about this moment is this idea that Eiichiro was a solely armament haki attack and not a Conqueror's infused one. Those with this interpretation tend to point out the fact that there aren't these big streaks of lightning that usually accompany Conqueror's haki, but this isn't actually relevant when putting things into its proper context. Before Zoro used Eiichiro, he told Law that what he was about to do was the limit of his ability. Zoro makes the point that if the fight drags on, they will only be wearing themselves down, meaning that Zoro intended to put everything he had into his final attack. In the King fight, Zoro learned that the correct way of using Enma wasn't by restricting his haki, but by giving the sword all he had. By doing this, Zoro also flowed out his Conqueror's haki and became the King of Hell. Zoro didn't realize it, but he did the same thing when using Eiichiro, which is why Conquerors flowed out with his attack, which is why Kaido is in shock and questions rhetorically if Zoro really is a Conqueror. It's also been made extremely clear that armament haki alone isn't enough to deal lasting damage or scar Kaido. This was shown through the scabbards as their combined Paradise Totsuka couldn't even open the wound Oden left, let alone give Kaido a new scar, and Luffy admitted that his advanced Ryo attacks were still too shallow. It was not until Luffy awakened advanced Conqueror's haki that he was able to deal lasting damage to Kaido. This is also true for Zoro, as his Dragon Twister with solely armament could cut Kaido, but only his Eiichiro dealt lasting damage. I don't think some people realize the implications of this. As Luffy proved once awakening advanced Conquerors, his base punches had actually surpassed his Gear 4th that was only powered by his armament, since his base Conqueror's punches were no longer too shallow. This would follow true for Zoro, as King was able to sense the threat that King of Hell Zoro represented to him after taking a no-name slash to the chest. Earlier in the fight, King was willing to tank any attack from Zoro in his flame on state, but against King of Hell, King was actively dodging and defending against these attacks. There's also some people that believe that hybrid Kaido is more durable than his dragon form, so since Zoro could scar a more durable form, that means his scarring attack is more impressive than Oden's, especially given Zoro's condition. But there's a problem with this reasoning. The basis for hybrid being more durable than the full dragon comes from 2 sources, the first being the anime, which isn't canon, so we'll be ignoring that, and the other being the Vivid Card databook. Kaido's Vivid Card states that when he transforms into his hybrid, his high physical abilities get improved even further. The first issue with this is that it doesn't even explicitly say that hybrid form is more durable than dragon form. The second issue is that what would the Vivid Card be referring to that Kaido is transforming from? The first option would be the dragon form, since Kaido was previously in his dragon form when hybrid first debuted, or the second option being from his base form. Whichever interpretation you go with, it doesn't really matter, since even if hybrid is more durable than the dragon form, there is nothing to suggest there's a big difference, as the manga portrays Kaido's toughness with both his hybrid and dragon form relatively the same. As for Zoro's scar and Kaido, even though it was impressive, especially given the condition he was in, it clearly doesn't compare to Oden's in the slightest. Kaido was able to endure the Ashura attack head on, keep his footing, and was still able to continue fighting at a high level against Yamato and Luffy. In the grand scheme of things, Zoro's attack didn't do that much compared to all the attacks Kaido was later taken on, despite it dealing some lasting damage. Whereas Oden's attack was so powerful that Kaido was arguably knocked out for a moment, and just off this one attack, Kaido considered Oden to be one of the few that can fight him at his level. In fact, the wound was so bad that we see Kaido still bandaged up many days after the fight, whereas Kaido could comfortably fight for a lot longer after Ashura. Zoro never garnered this much respect from Kaido and is merely praised for his efforts for an inferior fighter rather than being propped up as the monster samurai that Oden was. All this is further supported through Zoro's fight against King, in which he becomes the King of Hell. Zoro was able to defeat King after landing 3 Conqueror's coated attacks, however King wasn't in his defense mode when taking these attacks. It was still very impressive that Zoro could do this, as his final attack, the Dragon Damnation, was so strong that it broke King's sword and cut one of his wings. A week after the raid, we see King again, but this time he's been defeated by Admiral Greenbow. The main takeaway from this is how King has seemingly recovered from his fights against Zoro. He has a bandage on his head, but he doesn't have any bandages around his chest, despite being cut there a couple of times, and one of those attacks being the Dragon Damnation. This really shows the gap between Oden and Zoro, as Oden gave Kaido, who's more durable than Flame of King, a wound that lasted up to a week from a single attack, but King recovered quicker after taking 3 Conqueror's coated attacks from Zoro. The last thing that needs to be covered is the mastery of Enma, as Zoro notes how Oden was able to use the sword as if it was light as a feather. Now it's pretty clear that this aspect of Enma is something Oda thought of only after the Oden flashback, as during Oden's younger years, it never seemed as though he had any problem wielding Enma. However, Zoro notes that he was lacking strength for not being able to wield Enma like Oden once could. Zoro even mentions while using advanced conquerors that he couldn't drag on the fight with King for too long, or else Enma would eventually kill him by absorbing all his haki. It's very clear based on this that Oden is supposed to be a benchmark that Zoro will surpass in future, and that he's not on that level at the moment. There are even statements made by the narrator that Oden stood shoulder to shoulder with the greatest pirates in the world, which at the time would be Roger and Whitebeard, and that he returned to Wano invincible, which is the same image that Kaido had to the world as well. Kaido also puts Oden in the same breath as Whitebeard and Roger as mighty pirates who were soft-hearted. Not to mention that Whitebeard ordered Ace not to go after Kaido, who Oden couldn't even beat. Now we as readers know it wasn't a fair fight, but Oden's loss actually makes Kaido look all the more powerful, which is indicative of the beast that Oden was. So across the board, when it comes to feats against Kaido and his overall portrayal, Oden is clearly stronger than Zoro, and as of this recording, it's not even close. That's all for this topic, so if you enjoyed, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel. I've been the one and only Zage, and until next time.